you're fighting, and then the fight world at some point mixes with the comedy world. How did that come about? What were the first connections?
I was a coach on The Ultimate Fighter on Shane Carwin's season. He was supposed to fight Roy Nelson, but I think Roy got hurt, so then Shane ended up fighting Junior Dos Santos. Either way, that wasn't a good fight. But I was a coach in the house on The Ultimate Fighter, like a grappling specialist. And Nate Marquardt had a connection to Bryan Callen, who, is a big comic. And he brought Bryan in to make the kids laugh at the time of The Ultimate Fighter. And I was like, oh, hell yeah, I love stand-up. And, secretly, I like adore stand-up. It's what I've always wanted to do.
Did you tell anybody before that?
My mom knew, my brother knew, but I mean, in general, my friends wouldn't know. No, probably not. Maybe my college buddy I've talked about too when we got like drunk and stuff.
Sure.
But we also talked about like hooking up with dudes as a joke. So they didn't take me serious. So they brought Bryan into the house, and we met there and we hit it off. He's like, I have a show tonight. You should come. And I come to a show in Vegas. And then he's like, we just hit it out. We had this weird chemistry, and he was like, man, if you're ever in LA, hit me up, man. I was like, yeah, no doubt. And he was like, no, seriously. I was like, well, this, what's interesting is I'm actually moving to LA because I grew up in Venice Beach in the summers. My uncle lived here. My dad would always send me and my brother. He'd come with us during the summer. So I grew up in Denver, Aurora, Colorado, and then also Venice, California, Venice Beach, because at my uncle's place. So I was planning to leave Denver. I was on a 2-fight losing skid. I need to switch something up. So I was going to move to LA to find something new, start a new chapter. And so Bryan's like, hit me up when you come. I'm like, no doubt. So I remember packing up all my stuff in Denver, telling my family I'm going to leave. They're devastated. And the way I wanted to soften the blow, I was like, I'm coming back in a month. I'm only going there for a month, and I'll come back. I'll switch back. And they're like, okay, thank God. But I knew in my mind I was never coming back. So I packed everything up, drove down there. And then I remember I pulled into my uncle's place. And I just remember I started crying. I was like, I have nothing. I have no friends. I don't know what I'm going to do, how I'm going to figure it out. What the hell did I do? I need to go
mid-20s?
Mid-20s, 24. I was at 25, maybe. I was like devastated. I was like, God, you're an idiot, dude. I knew nobody. And I was like, oh yeah, that Bryan Callen guy gave me his number. So I'm like tears in my eyes and I'm texting him. I'm like, hey man, remember if you want to get coffee? I'm here. 2 seconds later, sounds good. Sent me an address, Intelligentsia off Main Street. And I was like, what? Or Abbott Kinney. I was like, he texts way too fast. Like he's so desperate to hang out. So I meet with him and then we're just talking about things. And again, we have this weird chemistry. He's like, man, I do a podcast. Dude, this is 12 years ago. He goes, I do a podcast. And I go, what's a podcast? He's like, it's like radio, but you record it. This is before everyone, their gay aunt had a podcast, right? Out of their garage. And he's like, I do a podcast. And I was like, I don't want to do that. He's like, no, come on. And we'll have fun. I'm like, all right, dude. So I go, it's out of his house in Santa Monica. We're in wife beaters. We have a picture of this. We're both in wife beaters and just talking shit or whatever. It gets done. He's like, man, we should do this once a week. I'm like, I don't want to do this once a week, man. And he's like, yeah, you'll just break down fighting. And I was like, oh, that's how you don't know me. I don't want to break down. Like my life is fighting right now. I don't want to do that. But if you allow me to talk fashion, cars, comedy, I'm in.
Anything else.
Yeah. He was like, all right, we can do that. I go, what should we call it? He's like, I don't know. I go, well, what's like your nickname? He's like, everyone calls me the Kid. I was like, okay. He's like, oh, how about the Fighter and the Kid? I was like, that's dope. Let's go with Fighter and the Kid. 2 years later, I realized he made that name up. Nobody calls him the Kid. He was 40 something years old when I met him. He's 42. Nobody calls him the Kid. He literally made that up. I was like, people don't call you on set. He's like, nah, man, no one's ever called me that. It'd be cool though. I'm like, wow.
They do now.
Our entire relationship started on a lie.
You're a fraud.
Yeah, you're a fraud. But yeah. So yeah, we just started doing it. And then we were having so much fun doing it. And then I remember we're one of the first to ever, athlete and a comic to start a podcast. Now, millions of people do it, but we were the first to do it.
I mean, we were talking 10, 12 years ago.
Yeah. We started
like
11 years ago. Yeah, man. Yeah. So, I remember I'd be walking the airport, going to like UFC, what was it, 2 or 174? Like I was going to Vancouver to fight Andre Arlovsky. I'm going through TSA and everyone's like saying things I say in the podcast. I'm like, oh, what are you doing in Vancouver, man? We're doing Toronto. I was like, what do you mean? Like, are you here doing comedy? I'm like, at the time I was in stand-up. I'm like, no. They're like, you're doing like a live podcast? I'm like, do you not have a TV? You don't see me on the promos for the big UFC? They're like, oh, that's right, dude. I'm like, and in my head, I'm like, oh shit.
Start realizing
they know me for being funny, not for being this meathead inside the octagon. I'm like, that's cool. And then, so we kept doing it, even though I was fighting. And then, at the time, We just started to get ads, for the first, 3-4 years, we weren't making any money. We never started the podcast to make money. I've never done it. I didn't start stand up to make money. I didn't start any podcast to make money.
Which is why you're making money at it now.
Maybe, yeah. Maybe I've never done anything just like, oh, this is just for the dollars.
Right.
Like I didn't start my whiskey because I want to turn into Conor McGregor. I did it because I love whiskey, So anything I do, it has to be organic. You can't force me to do anything now. Nothing. So yeah, with the podcast, even with stand up, like money, it was great. You're going to pay me to do it. I would do it anyway.
Sure.
So it's great. But I remember we got our first like major check for doing podcasting at the time we were with Fox. I got the first major check. And then I also had my check on the counter. I was living in an 800 square foot apartment in Marina Del Rey with my girl, my wife now. And we had the 2 checks sitting there, and the check for being this silly dumbass compared to the check of getting punched in the face was way more. I was like, figure it out, dude. I was like, oh, I'm done. I'm out of here. So I just ran with podcasting after that. And then
that was the last fight.
That was the last fight ever.